We're live, and we're just going to give another couple minutes here, or not minutes, but a couple seconds for people to sign on as we get going.
Yeah, but this is impressive. Look, there's a Kurtz. It's probably one of your family members.
All right. So I'm David Kurtz of TPM. I do TPM's Morning Memo. I'm joined with my former TPM colleague, Brian Beutler, who worked at TPM way back in the day and now runs Off Message, which is just a great resource for understanding the current moment. And I don't think there's anybody as adept and insightful as Brian in shaping what a real opposition to Trump ought to look like and a real opposition to an authoritarian major party ought to look like. So, Brian, thank you for joining us.
Oh, this is great. I'm so happy to do it.
I wanted to just touch on. I came to this immediately from watching a bit of Trump's press conference. He was joined with the defense secretary and the CIA director and others, touting the rescue of an American airman in Iran over the weekend. A few highlights from that: Hegseth, in really explicit terms, framed it as a passion play, with the pilot in the role of Jesus, shot down on Friday, hiding in a cave on Saturday, and resurrected on Sunday, which was a bit of an unexpected twist, but consistent with him, on brand for sort of the brand of Christian nationalism that he brings to the table. For his part, Trump threatened any leakers of the fact that this pilot was missing or this airman was missing with jail if they didn't divulge. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Went after the leaker, but threatened any media company that had reported it with jail if they didn't divulge who it was. And I'm not sure exactly how that news emerged, but if I recall, and I wasn't totally plugged in on this, but the fact that it had gone down was widely reported, and the fact that one was rescued was widely reported, and that leaves the inference that the other crew member had not been rescued. So I don't know if there was a specific leak. Brian, do you recall if anybody had like the exclusive on still a missing, or is he just sort of generally tilting at windmills here?
Yeah, I think he's just tilting specifically at the windmill of you don't get to report any of the failures of this war without us attacking it.
That's right.
So the backdrop for this, the additional backdrop, is that they're pressuring private satellite companies to censor essentially satellite imagery, real-time satellite imagery of the war area, so
Right.
that people who do journalism or open source intelligence stuff can't really see what's happening well enough to evaluate how honest the government is being about the war. But I mean, if even just listening to you describe how this all unfolded, I mean, clearly Trump wants adulation from the press for the successful effort to exfiltrate the pilot who went down. And what was he going to do if the media had been obedient and nobody had leaked about the incident in the first place? Is have a press event where you said, well, you didn't know this, but they shot one of our planes down, but don't worry, we got the pilot, right? Like, the only way to claim credit in the way that he did is for the fact that there was a plane shot down to initially be reported. And when I saw it, I mean, I can't remember thinking that there was anything extraordinary about the fact that the news broke or wondering who the source was, because it's not unusual when
Right.
something like that happens for the public to become aware of it. And it's not even clear to me that if the source for whoever first broke the news, and I can't even remember, uh, was from the Pentagon or from one of the branches, that they would have been doing anything wrong, like
That's
that there was
right.
anything wrong with it. So the whole
Or out of school in doing so, right? We
yes,
talked about
right.
us in doing so.
And so, yeah, I was, before we started, just kind of catching up on what happened in the press conference, because I had meetings kind of right up until now. And I caught that, and the whole thing, I mean, he says a lot of stuff, and, he has a U.S. attorney in D.C. who seems fine with going to grand juries to be told no true bill or whatever. So maybe something will happen with some reporter. He clearly wants reporters to be fearful
Right.
of reporting true and unflattering things about what's happening.
He does say a lot of things, as you put it, and the other thing I wanted to highlight, it was a little abrupt, almost a parenthetical to the to the touting of the rescue. And he just paused and said the entire country could be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night, which seemed like a re-upping of the sort of crazy Easter Sunday morning tweet that he did, that threatened Iran's bridges and power plants and all the civilian infrastructure that you could reach. And I think we still have this Tuesday deadline in his head that he is sort of, saber rattling around, which the only way I can make any sense of, if there is sense to be made of it at all, is that it's happening as there are reports of these back channel negotiations for some sort of ceasefire, and in classic Trump fashion, just making a maximalist demand as part of the negotiations is just kind of all he knows how to do, right? That is the level of his negotiation sophistication. And so threatening war crimes, threatening to go over the top, threatening to, as he put it here, just make sure I get the phrasing right, take out the entire country, I think is part of that, I think. But
Mhm.
as you say, he says lots of things, and making sense of it is sometimes difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is his approach in domestic political negotiation too. Is the idea that like there's a level of brutality at which you will choose to cave to me rather than stand up for yourself. And uh, basically, everyone who's tested that proposition has come out better than the people who caved to it in the United States context and in non-military conflict with the United States over trade, like Canada when NATO stood up with Denmark against Trump's threats against Greenland. That's when he backs down, right? And I mean, my concern, since the tweet or whatever it is, the truth over the weekend, and seeing what he said at the press conference today, is that he seems to have um, placed himself in a bind, gotten himself into a bind where he has to either humiliatingly climb down, back, like just walk away from the war, leaving Iran in a much stronger position than it was in before he started this war, or tore up the JCPOA, or wherever you want to start the clock, or else escalate until his theory that like I will brutalize you until you choose acquiescence becomes true. And it's just that's a very scary dynamic, because he can escalate an air campaign to nuclear war essentially without any mechanism to stop him. And we are counting on his essentially his narcissistic vanity, the fact that his approval ratings are falling and Republicans are turning against the war, and so on and so on, to be the bulwark, the one thing that keeps him from doing the worst thing imaginable. And that's like very cold comfort for me.
Very cold comfort, and hasn't proven to be worth investing anything in at any point in the Trump era, right? I mean,
Yeah, sometimes he tacos, and sometimes he causes a lot of damage, and then walks away. It's not it. There's no reason to think that one of these times he won't go too far to where he can't retreat,
right.
and we may be there. So
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that it feels worth assessing as we descend deeper and deeper into the Trump era. Reassessing, maybe is a better word, how we got here, because there's been lots of discussions about this over the years, and lots of debate, worthy, I think, of kind of how we got to this point. But the deeper we get, I think it sort of changes maybe how we should think about the getting here. And you and I, 10, 15 years ago, I should say, you were a charter member of the DC bureau when we opened here in 2009, and you were our lead reporter on Obamacare, which still remains for me an interesting insight into like the pre-Trump Republican Party. That I remember conversations that we had on a regular basis just about how far Republicans had already gone at that point in being divorced from policy and being purely interested in the exercise of power, and what the implications were for that, not just for Democrats and how to pass legislation and run campaigns, but at a more fundamental level, like what does that mean for democracy when one of the two major political parties has just sort of given up on policy entirely. So I wanted just to go back and have you recount some of that in brief, just to refresh recollections about. I mean, I remember, for instance, you and I, our office at the time on the Hill was right next door to Eric. And hold on one second, I think I somehow, my apologies. I got some Trump press conference live going there in the other room.
Don't traumatize our viewers.
Yeah, no kidding. But you and I, the week of the Tea Party election in 2010, we went over to Mitch McConnell's
Oh,
speech,
right.
a few days after, and Republicans had done very well. Democrats lost control of the House, and McConnell was talking about the number one goal being just to make sure Obama was a one-term president, right? So this is in I think I may have said 12 before, but I meant 10. Anyway, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for that period and sort of how that ends up being a jumping off point for where we are now.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think either of us foresaw exactly what the Republican Party descent into sort of authoritarian politics would look like that it would lead to somebody like Donald Trump as opposed to somebody like Ted Cruz or whatever. But it was evident to us, or much earlier than anyone knew Trump would ever run, that these like procedural gambits that Republicans were using to oppose Obama weren't part of a normal opposition playbook, at least as we understood it in post-war American politics. And I think, for me, and I think for Barack Obama, the sort of the moment where he realized that things were going to be a little different was with the stimulus, where he came into office, the economy had collapsed. Republicans and Democrats in the waning days of the Bush administration had passed legislation to keep the financial institutions from collapsing. But then they needed to do a stimulus to make sure that people who lost their jobs would have money. The people who kept their jobs would have bonus money, kind of increase demand in the economy. And their thinking was, we'll send this to the Hill and Republicans will actually want to add to it to help ensure that their districts are protected. And instead, there was near unanimous Republican opposition to it. And they had to negotiate the stimulus down, right? And this sort of set the stage for the whole Obama presidency, in that you had this weak recovery running through the whole thing. And it was made weak in large part because of this miscalibration where Democrats assumed Republicans would behave one way, and Republicans had clearly adopted a lockstep opposition theory about how to protect themselves from like an Obama revolution, like to counter the Reagan revolution, right? And so that's how they approached their resistance to healthcare. And it's ironic because in some sense, what Republicans were doing then was like the correct move if you imagine that Barack Obama was actually some kind of authoritarian menace or threat, right? Like that if they actually thought that he was going to wreck the country, then making sure that everything he tried to do failed, even if what he was trying to do at the moment was in the best interest of the country, the moral logic kind of works. That it's like that is like a drill tweet where it's like there are differences between good things and bad things. And like Obama was just a successful politician that made the Republican Party look bad and unappealing. But there were going to be more elections. They were going to have another bite at the apple.
That's right.
And like this kind of radicalization was something that they opted into. And we're now many years into the Trump era. And I'm just kind of waiting for it's getting there, but I'm waiting for Democrats to act with as much like
Cold calculus and
the equivalent of Hakeem Jeffries going to CAP and saying our goal is to prevent Donald Trump from turning America into a right-wing dictatorship. Our goal is whatever, just like, but we're going to stop him. And like that energy, like it was on the face of the Republican opposition to Obama, and it's kind of on the back of the sleeve of, of the Democratic leadership's attitude toward Trump. And so, yeah, like a lot of my thinking over the Trump years has been informed by how Republicans did effective massive resistance to an imaginary enemy. And what's needed now is massive resistance to a real one.
But it's an interesting template for what that looks like, right?
Yeah. It's look, like it's different circumstances. Trump's trying to do different things, different sort of confrontations militate for different tactics or whatever. But the basic clear-eyed no to this man, like whatever he's proposing, no, is would steady the Democratic Party ship in a way that, they're much more helter-skelter approach or whatever is like just causing them all kinds of problems.
Right. So we're a year plus in now to Trump 2, and I'm curious what your reaction is to how things have gone so far. I have found myself, and I would, you know, this may sound like a humble brag, but in a way, it's more a confession than anything. I feel like I've been at the leading edge with many others of kind of warning how bad him being reelected would be and how bad this entire movement is and the threat that it poses. And yet, at each step along the way, finding myself surprised by the speed and the scope of what's happened. Have you had a similar sense? And maybe
Yeah,
where has it surprised you, or where have you kind of been most struck by the
so
unexpected?
yeah, I always try to be wary when this question comes up to not be like, I knew everything that was going to happen before it happened, because that's definitely not true. But I did anticipate that Trump was going to try to move very fast. I knew that there was going to be a big assault on the civil service, but I didn't really obviously anticipate that Elon Musk would become like a co-president and do Doge
Right.
exactly the way they did, with like genuinely just strong arm police state like tactics,
Yep.
taking property that didn't belong to them, stuff like that. I I actually expect, if anything, I expected that they'd be have their shit a little more together to go after people like Jim Comey. Not necessarily in his case, but that it would be a priority for them to actually get one of these guys. And instead, it's bad that they're doing it, but they seem to really not understand that, like, it matters that Trump made up these grievances, and therefore these people are not likely to be prosecuted ever. So in a way, I was actually prepared for worse on that front. Even though I'm like a little bit taken aback by how shameless they have been about that.
Yeah, that's the part. I thought they would do it with more window dressing and have
Mhm.
a veneer of legitimacy to what the Justice Department was doing that they haven't even bothered to pretend to have, right? They've just, "We're gonna strong arm it through," but the effect has been, as you suggest, a much less effective, from their point of view, targeting of various foes and whatnot.
Yeah, I remembered from the COVID crisis in particular that Trump is very responsive to market signals. Um, and so it's not like I thought like that there'd be a taco equilibrium or whatever, but that I really did expect that when Trump pushed things too far in some sort of foreign policy making scenario, terrorists in particular, that there would be like, we couldn't count on a cool headed advisor or somebody with the balls essentially to tell
That's
him,
right.
no, you can't do this. But we could expect him to see, the bond market puke or the stock market collapse, and that he would then retreat. I didn't really have. I've always thought that, like, just like what Marco Rubio used to say about Trump, like, this is not somebody you can entrust with the U.S. military and the nuclear codes, was a totally correct, obvious on its face critique and warning. And you know, there are things about Trump's narcissism that I think make him gravitate toward using the military, and then there are things about it that I think make him reluctant to get involved in cataclysmic warfare. And now we're kind of like, those two things are up against each other. So I
There's
didn't
some
really,
at the moment.
yeah, I mean, I didn't really like would have a sense of like whether he would get himself into a quagmire in the Middle East specifically. But I was just, when he got reelected, I was like, it's hard to see to the end of 4 years without all kinds of horrible things happening, and that is one space where I was like, and it could easily be that, because the dude just should not have this kind of power.
Right.
So and like you, being prepared for it has kind of been cold comfort, because it happens and then you're powerless to stop it. And often even the opposition party is powerless to stop it. But as it has happened, at least for the first several months of this, the opposition party didn't seem to show much interest in stopping it. And like the street resistance that we saw in the first term took a while to get back up off its feet, right there. I think there was this feeling like, we've been at this for so long, and then you guys let him get back into power. Like, what use is it for us to get back into marching and protesting? Um, so so
And there was also
I
the, not to
just
interrupt,
like you, I felt I feel like this kind of pit in my stomach whenever these things happen, and it's almost like, when you have a loved one who's very sick, and you know how the story's going to end, and that gives you some like it's you have some clarity, you have some closure in advance, but then watching the bad things happen to them doesn't come easy or anything. You know what
That's
I mean?
right. That's right. Well, and I think the thing I didn't anticipate to the degree that it happened was the way other institutional players proved to be brittle or corrupt or compromised so quickly, so willingly, and so easily in the first few months. And that seems to have eased up a little bit, but a lot of damage has already been done to higher education and to big law and to some of the other, I mean, I don't put the blame on science and medical research, but but that whole institutional area too has been plowed through. There's just lots of other what we might think of as non-political institutional players, or not directly political at least, that just proved sort of be willing to fold their wings, at least for the time being. And that hadn't anticipated the degree to which it happened.
Yeah, I think when Trump got elected the first time, there's some report to the effect that Obama's advice to his staff was, or to the party, I guess, was to find some high ground and hunker down. Basically, like this is going to be a storm that blows through, and your main thing is just get out of the way and let it pass, and then be ready when it's passed. And like, I think that was maybe like a little bit dodgy advice at the
Yes.
time. And it seems to have given way in the second term to just hunker down anywhere, right? You don't even need to find the high ground. And so I did. It it seemed to me like it became clear quickly, but I was surprised that like corporations were just going to use legal settlement process as a backdoor way to bribe him. I knew that this was going to be a much more corrupt administration than his first one, but I didn't really have the imagination to see, like cryptocurrency pass-throughs to just give him billions of dollars and tearing down the East Wing. Like all that stuff is just like you can do your best to try to think like a crook like Trump, who's also like an
Right.
egomaniac. And unless you actually are that way, it's really hard to come up with how venal they really are. And I think a lot of people in charge of corporate institutions, universities, law firms, or whatever, just decided, let's get out of the way. Like maybe this guy really is gonna establish a 30-year Reich, and we can't like his first moves out the gate just put up a fight when we could cough up a little and get him off our back. And it's like really unfortunate that was like the what the collective action problem yielded as the easiest solution for so many people. But that
Yeah.
sucks.
So I want to posit kind of two different scenarios for where things go from here as a way of answering the question, how much worse is it going to get? One is Republicans hold both houses in November, and the other is Democrats at least get one. So kind of, let's play with what that looks like a little bit. I mean, I think if Republicans hold serve and he has another 2 years uninterrupted, I mean, there's nothing I see on the horizon, even his lame duck status, that's going to really slow down him going in pretty much whatever direction he wants to go to continue to do the kinds of things he's doing. And as you were saying a moment ago, the international realm is in many ways the most dangerous because there's institutionally, constitutionally, structurally, there's the least restraint on him in any president in that realm. And so
Yep.
that feels just like open season. He can do whatever he wants, and it's hard to even predict where that goes. Domestically, I think it's similar. So that I don't know anything, and let's start with that one because I think it's the easier one. It's just like
Yeah.
the bottom. I don't even know what the limit is there.
It's so funny because like I in all the thinking that I do about what the future might look like, I've given the least thought to the scenario where Republicans somehow pull a rabbit out of our hat and hold the House and Senate after the midterms. And so I feel like we should bracket, for now at least, the possibility that happens as the result of some sort of fuckery.
Right.
Because that creates a different set of, I think, imperatives for people like us, for people like Democrats in Washington. If it really seems like the election should have gone one way, but through various forms of chicanery, it went another way, like what does that obligate the opposition party to do? What does it obligate regular opposition figures to do is a big question. The but like if it's sort of like a weird fair and square victory and we just didn't see it coming, kind of analogous to what happened in 2022 when a lot of people thought that the Democrats were toast. Um, you're right. There's just gonna be a lot more damage. Like the judiciary is going to be so Trumpified by the time Democrats have a chance to govern again. That it, I guess the silver lining would be that it would make it really hard for anyone with a brain in democratic politics to deny that they need to do something about the courts. But the courts will be just, like probably half Trump appointees at that point,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
crazy. I think that they would continue to run into difficulty getting grand juries to indict and petit juries to convict people on trumped up charges. Just imagine what Trump's ego would be telling him to do if after all this, he managed to win an election and there wasn't even controversy about the fact that Republicans won it is, just the amount that the degree to which the country's institutions would be degraded, the perception of the United States abroad would be degraded. Basically, everything that we're watching happen now and fretting about and feeling pits in our stomachs about would be, like monumentally worse on the other side. But and like we should probably talk about this in the context of I think the likelier scenario where Democrats win at least the House or the
Yeah, I
Senate.
think that's the more interesting scenario. And
Yeah, is that like either way, the thing that gives me a lot of, it gets really tempting to be like, I just want to have a little hibernation, wake up in January 2029 and see where we are.
right,
But the thing that makes it feel like, in some ways, like a hopeful project, that there's going to have to be some kind of rebuilding. And the kinds of people who would be equipped to do that are, they like exist among the rubble, right? Like they're the people Trump kicked out of CDC and NIH and
right,
various, right? Like many of those people have real expertise, real historical knowledge of how the government did work and didn't work, and they will be excited, I think, to help put the pieces back together post Trump, no matter what. And like it's just true that as much damage as he's doing and as hard as this all is, US is a huge country with a big economy and an enormous military, and it's going to be a player in the world one way or another. And there will be an opportunity if Democrats are able to regain power in 2029, and ideally, right, like across like a trifecta, to implement the kind of reforms that both sort of restore sense of like small d democratic normalcy at home, and also provide the world some assurance that we've taken steps to reduce the likelihood that anything like this will happen again. And so, like, oddly, I'd feel like a lot more despairing about the situation if we weren't starting from such a high place, right? That like, there are countries in the world that the rest of the world can essentially write off if they fuck up to this degree, like the
right,
United Kingdom or
right,
whatever. But like the United States is either going to be a superpower that does more good than bad, or a superpower that does more bad than good, and there's going to be a next chapter in this story, right? And hopefully it's the people who wanted to do more good than bad that end up taking over, and then having some ideas kind of ready to go to 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 change the system and impose accountability so that we can all kind of like really satisfy ourselves that that's actually behind us,
right.
Now, like I don't like.
Yeah, you're coming off way more optimistic about this prospect than I expected you to, and than I am, and I'm trying to figure out why. Because I
It's
look
not
back at like the
it's not something I would bank on. I just like it's like there is a pinpoint of light at the end of
right,
this.
right,
And like, like, where would that be coming from? Like, what is the source of that? It's something that looks like what I described, which on some days feels like really hard to fathom because it's just going so badly.
right,
But you know, I think about things like obviously it wasn't nearly like this, and it wasn't nearly as contemptuous of allied nations or anything like that. But George W. Bush's Iraq War was a quagmire.
Right.
It uh, you recall, I think it was Ari Fleischer. No, it was Don Rumsfeld talking about old Europe and writing off
Yes.
France and Germany, and like our actual NATO allies are the Baltic states and stuff like that,
Right.
and Barack Obama came into power and he did what Republicans derided as the apology tour. And he was basically, trying to do a version of what I'm talking about, minus the part where the bad actors in the Bush
Yeah.
administration got off scot free, where he said, like, America always renews itself and like there'll be bad leaders, but then people like me are waiting in the wings and like you can't give up on the US. And in a weird way, I think like that's just a fact of the world. It's not like a plea from Obama or from whoever becomes the next Democratic president to please don't give up on us. It's sort of like we're so big and powerful that countries don't have a whole lot of choice, and so you can use that to your advantage while
Sure.
also while also like making gestures that make them think, okay, like maybe this is not so bad. Maybe it's still a better bet that China be the global super or that US be the global superpower than China.
So look,
I
let's
can't.
roll it back to from
I don't want
January.
to come across as Pollyannish.
No, no, I hear you. So let's move it up from 29, January 29 to January of 27.
Okay.
And what's a reasonable expectation if Democrats do take the House? What's a reasonable expectation for what they do, what their role should be? I mean, I envision it much more as engaging in almost a guerrilla style way with Trump at sort of every level, investigative, you know, public rhetoric, like the whole 9 yards, just to keep him pinned down. Doesn't mean that they can stop him, doesn't mean that they can begin implementing reforms. Things can't be fixed, but it's almost they'd be in a position to at least get in the way and slow down the pace of damage that would continue through the rest of his first, or I guess what is now second term.
Hmm.
Does that strike you as the proper role, or do you envision it in a different way? It's
No,
almost
that's
like
right.
an expectation setting.
Yeah. So, I mean, the piece I wrote for today is about how I think Democrats should be forcing impeachment votes now, like as like a mechanism for saying that if we don't get rid of this guy, we don't know how bad this Iran war situation. Again, we all know that he should not be in charge of it. So, like, I definitely think like tactical aggression and oversight is going to be important. Like, I really do hope that Democrats are wargaming what their options are because I expect Trump to um, uh, announce basically a blanket embargo on cooperation with congressional oversight if Democrats would just from the get go, almost like analogous to pardoning all the January Sixers, is
Yeah.
basically being like,
We're not
we're
going to
not going
comply with your subpoenas. We're not going to show up for your
to say it.
hearing.
Yep,
We're not
just
going to. We're just going to pretend you don't exist. I mean, basically, a more aggressive version of what he did in the first term, which was just to slow roll everything through the 4 years. This
yep,
would be: we're not even going to pretend. We're not even going to play the game. We are not recognizing you as having proper authority or legitimate authority here.
that's exactly right. Right,
Pounds
and so and I just don't think it's tenable for the approach to be the same that we saw from in 2019 and 2020, where it's like, okay, that means we're going to have to pick just a couple of things, and then we're going to have to litigate each
That's
aspect,
right.
and that's going to get tied up in court. And yeah, we can rely on the precedent from Trump v. Mazars or whatever else, but really, this is a question for judges to answer for us rather than for us to answer for ourselves. So I think that they need to be, whether they do an impeachment or not, and I'm generally pro, is to like think about this as a war game where like you anticipate their moves and what your counter moves are going to be and how you might leverage outside sources of information to get you the information that also resides in the executive branch. So, one thing I would have liked to have seen more of already is some saber rattling at the same corporate institutions that have been folding to Trump, to say like the rule of law didn't end in the United States, and we are going to look at everything you did vis-a-vis him, every dollar you gave him, did you commit money to the ballroom or whatever. Yeah, we're looking into all of that as a way to set a different expectation, which is that
Yeah.
if we're doing an oversight investigation of the administration that runs through you, and you bend to pressure from him not to cooperate, that that's going to cause you trouble in the future, right? Like we are going to make sure people know that that's a partisan decision. It's going to cause you problems with your customers, and there will be another sheriff in town at some point. And you're going to have to contend with them, so that the we can answer questions like whether it's like who's been trading on inside information about the wars
Yep.
or tariffs or whatever. I mean, like there's a litany we could run down
Well, that's right.
where
And what demands are being put on companies by the administration to play ball in what ways, right? What kind of contract demands, for instance, are being put on companies to do work with DHS under NOAA or to do work with the Pentagon, right? Whether it's the Anthropics or, the Palantirs, like all of these different companies have already exhibited qualms about the level of corruption they've been forced to sort of play ball with,
yep,
even after what, 15 months?
yeah, and then like simultaneously to that, there needs to be an open door to whistleblowers, and I think that there needs to be a a really robust appetite for leaving uh, departments, offices, or even multiple, like essentially the whole federal government without appropriations for like significant periods.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna
That-
go next. The appropriations piece seems key because if they're, like, pounding sand is their message on investigations and subpoenas and hearings and oversight in general, I mean, I think the thing I've been most surprised about is just the ignoring of appropriations, ignoring of the entire budget and appropriations process, like basically sidelining Congress from that entirely,
yeah,
which is exactly, I mean, the House is in a way the better of the two to win in that realm, since it has to originate there anyway. And so, what does that look like? Like, what is the game plan for that, or the war plan for that?
yeah. So it
Not to put
it's
you on
a,
the spot.
no, 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 no. I think it's like this is what we're doing now is what I sort of hope is happening at some level in the Democratic leadership suites on Capitol Hill, because like one thing that could happen, you could imagine we get to September of this year, and because it's like the election's coming up and nobody wants to rock the boat too much, um, or because Democrats like to appropriate and Republicans are trying to make themselves seem normal. They reach an agreement to fund multiple departments or all of the departments for a full fiscal year. Well, that would put the Democrats' first leverage point over Trump in the new majority into September 2027, which means it's going to be a long time before they can threaten to withhold funds from departments or offices in order to gain compliance with oversight, right? And so they should be thinking right now, we are not going to accept any kind of like CR deal or omnibus deal or any kind of appropriations deal at the end of this fiscal year that takes us much further than January 2027, right? Like, and then we'll be in charge and we'll have it out with Trump. But it's really like uh, once upon a time, I think it was understood that it wasn't really like a proposition worth testing. That if Congress demands documents, you have a process. If at the end of that process you're still at loggerheads, they issue a subpoena. Then you fight over the subpoena. But if Congress can threaten to defund the director's office or take away their airplane or whatever. Just like we're going to make your job feel unpleasant, so you might as well just cooperate. Is Trump, by being lawless, has kind of removed that kind of fear from the people who work subordinate to him. And so, kind of the best you can do is what you saw with what you see ongoing with the DHS shutdown, which I guess is technically over now. Um, but basically, they're like, we insist that these changes be made to how ICE conducts itself, and your plans imagined regular appropriations for ICE. So we're not gonna fund that part of the government anymore until you actually start negotiating with us the way normal presidents negotiated with Congress in the past. And that just I think like in order to be able to exert that leverage, you have to set up the board to be able to make the demand in the first place. So I think that that's like roughly how it would look. But so we see that this gives them some leverage over ICE, and it's unclear whether we're ever going to get the policy changes that they're demanding. But if they don't get those changes, then the pre-funded ICE that Stephen Miller put into the OBBA will get drawn down quicker than he anticipated, which is not what he wants. So right there, you see the source of potential leverage to make policy change. Well, you can try to pick similar fights with the Department of Defense to make to strengthen the War Powers Act, or with the Department of Justice to do something about like the for my friends everything, for my enemies the law ethos that has taken
Right.
over there. Not to where you can get it, I think, functioning like a normal Justice Department, but where you can like stem some of the worst abuses. And at the very least, if they continue to operate lawlessly, they're going to be doing it without money, and also you're not going to be seen as having thrown up your hands and given up and chosen to fight about
Right.
prices or whatever.
Right.
Um, but it really does require playing like a game of Risk almost.
Yeah, it does. I think with more imagination perhaps too than any of us have had up to this point. One of the things about the rebuild down the road, and maybe now we're back to 29, is just how so many of the discussions that I see about what has to be done seem so small bore and so small scale compared to the challenge that we face. Bob Bauer, the Obama White House counsel, had a piece this morning on what Justice Department reform might look like. And he, not to pick on him, and he conceded they were pretty modest proposals, but it was things like adding requirements uh, to what it to the attorney general position, right? That you can't have been a member of the campaign of the president, you can't have been his personal attorney, things like that, or maybe create some sort of supermajority requirement for confirmation. But these all strike me as almost unsatisfying, and just how right the notion that we can just go back to what we had before, and that there isn't a persistent, ongoing authoritarian threat in the country by a significant portion of the populace and their leadership, seems to me to just it's a key element of what you need to do to kind of keep the vandals out a second
Mhm.
time or a third time. But I
So,
don't see a lot of discussions that are kind of taking place at that broader sort of level.
so to reflect back on you earlier being puzzled by my optimism. The I think optimism comes a lot easier to people who think it's possible. I think it's essential, but I also think it's possible.
Right.
The Democrats will abolish the filibuster, add seats to the judiciary and the Supreme Court, and um, and impose legal and professional accountability on as many of the people responsible for criminal wrongdoing as possible. If those things happen, a lot of the stuff that Bob Bauer's talking about are going to sound pretty are going to seem pretty rinky dink, right? Like,
Right.
or else there'll be problems that solve themselves that you can legitimately like put off for another day. And my, when I write in a frustrated voice now, it's because I feel like the kind of creative thinking about how to signal that there are going to be consequences. Like you can write them out. You can write them as a newsletter. You can write them as a strategy memo that you send to the leadership office or whatever. But like nothing is happening on that score. And like some ideas, right? Like state level Democrats could pass legislation to say if you worked for ICE in 2025, 2026, 2027, you're barred from state level government service. So if you ever want to leave that agency and come back and work at your local police department, sorry, you're out. One thing that I like scenario that,
Declassification type of scenario.
yeah, no, in advance, right?
Yeah.
But on the topic of debathification, one scenario, and like actually your legal training will tell me if I'm onto something. One thing I fear is that the Supreme Court is going to rule on things like USAID, Department of Education, Schedule F stuff, and they're going to say, oops, turns out that was all illegal. But of course, by the time they rule, it'll have been 3 years since the firings happened. Most of those people will not want or be able to take their jobs back. Trump will replace them with Trump loyalists who will now be like bureaucrat level,
Right.
like career service, civil service people.
And sitting there when the next Democrat comes into office.
And the Supreme Court will have said the next Democrat can't fire them the way Trump did.
That's right.
Right. And like, this is something that I think is like, maybe it's not certain to happen, but the possibility is like right there in front of us. Right. And so what should, if you're a Democrat who wants to be president, like how should you be thinking about that? What should you be doing and saying now to make it clear to the public and to the court that that double standard is not going to fly, and that if he gets to remake the government in his image, we get to remake it in ours? And if that means you got to pass new legislation, okay, that means getting rid of the filibuster. If they're going to throw out that legislation, that means expanding the court so that these 6 corrupt justices don't get to write the law for everybody until they die. And I just feel like they are basically like, we are going to come up with our plans for how to rebuild on the fly if we win.
Yeah.
Which is bad because it's like a strategy game, and you really do need to think moves ahead, and that starts now, not in 2029. But the flip side of that is that, like, if they realize that this isn't like the kind of partisan slaps in the face that they had to deal with when George W. Bush was president, and that it's just like they've been under assault by people that they viewed as colleagues, I guess, for so long, and that kind of radicalizes them into doing the big procedural reforms to the court, to the filibuster, adding states to the union, blah blah blah. Like the road to rebuilding seems exciting to me in a scenario like that, right?
Yes. Yes.
And like, a sort of scenario where like the best and brightest, I know, unfortunate phrase, but like return, right? And they like they have ideas pre-written, and they're kind of ready to go to restaff institutions that were working and that were just vandalized for no reason, and build new ones to replace ones that weren't working, and go to the world and say, look, like we've changed our system enough that like it's very unlikely that we're going to have to deal with another Trump-like figure in the near future. And that just seems like something to look forward to. But if you don't do that, then what is the appeal of wanting to preside over what's going to be left over if you don't have a real plan, a real credible plan to get it back? It's like a little bit befuddling to me that you could have all these ambitious Democrats, and they seem to be okay with this sort of
incremental,
just like get through the next day.
Because the last thing you want is to preside over the rubble for 4 years, right? And then you have no position to defend your own reelection 4 years from that point, right? Like it is, look at what you've wrought. It's just a mess, and so we need to come back in again to fix up the mess that we saddled you with. But that's not what it's going to be, right? It's going to be the mess that you created, and look at what a mess it is. I think so much of this goes to the right people in the right place at the right time, right? That the moment that we had before Trump is so different from the one we have now. It's going to be so different from the one post-Trump that it just calls for different skills, different talents, different personalities in politics than the ones we've had up to this point. And if that doesn't fundamentally change, right? It as you say, a best and brightest, but also like a reemergence of a new sort of brand of politics, a new approach to politics that doesn't seek to get back to what we had before, because that's gone, right? It's not coming back. You can't replace it. And there's no appeal, even for people who were diametrically opposed to Trump. I don't think there's any appeal in going back, in part because the indictment of what was is that Trump rose in the first place, right? And that's an indictment you can't easily shake off.
Yeah. So, I mean, contrast what you read Bauer writing or what you heard him saying to, I think Andrew Weissman has a book coming out about like what it would, I don't know if it's all about this or this is one piece of it, that what kind of reforms could you make or laws could you pass to make it so that if a politician rejects the results of an election and claims it was stolen when it wasn't, that they disqualify themselves from future office?
Right. And like put it in the Insurrection Act or Insurrection Clause rather.
And like looking to how foreign democracies that have dealt with this problem better than we have. Like,
Right.
how did they write their laws, and how would we do it to get around First Amendment concerns and blah blah blah? Is that there are people putting real thoughts into complicated questions, and giving them the space to implement their ideas without like all the navel gazing about whether there will be blowback on cable television if we take this position or if we'll seem too partisan. It's just like, no, we we need the people who've been ready for this moment to be able to act and not really second guess them too much. Just like obviously it's public work, so they are accountable too, but they can't be waylaid by you know uh like the Cornhusker kickback argument
Yes.
in the Senate over like what do we get in Nebraska over it. Is it's going to be essential, but to be optimistic again, I think that there's this kind of recurrent pattern in liberalism, that you know between crises, liberals seek to avoid the next crisis by going the extra mile to achieve consensus, even when the people on the other side of them are just ratcheting further and further away from consensus oriented politics, which is why you had Democrats like desperate to try to plead with their colleagues to for the greater good, blah blah blah, instead of just realizing, okay, we're actually in the second fight now, right?
Yeah.
A version of this happened before the Civil War. It happened between the Civil War and the Civil Rights era. I think it's something like that is happening now, and what emerges out of it, at least for a period of time, is a more muscular and on guard kind of liberalism that is kind of like the water's warm if you guys want to come back and participate. But we're not going to pretend like, okay, now we're back to bipartisan comity. Like we are going to do the thing,
Right.
with or without you, and it's going to happen quickly.
All
Like,
right. That's a good note to end it on, I think. If you haven't
yeah,
if you haven't checked out Brian's Off Message, I'd encourage you to do so. It's a great resource. And I'll make a pitch for TPM as well. We're in the midst of our annual membership drive. If you're a TPM reader who's not a member, we urge you to join. We can't do this without you. Incredibly important to have your support and to be able to do the kind of independent journalism that we do, and help spawn people like Brian to go out in the world and continue to do that kind of good work on their own as
I
well.
second all that except for the nice things you said about me, which are totally unmerited.
Thanks for coming on, Brian. I appreciate
Yeah,
it. Good
man, this
talking
was
to you.
great.
Take care.